Want to know how every company in America can save 23% on their employee wages? Simple. Just hire women. Welcome to the best show in the universe. I'm Maddox. When you control for hours worked, education, experience level, and job choices, the gender-based wage gap almost entirely disappears. Don't believe me? I've included sources all throughout this video that you can check for yourself in the description below. The wage gap claim is one of the most persistent pieces of misinformation of our times. In a recent State of the Union address, President Obama said that a woman deserves equal pay for equal work. Well, no shit. Then he went on to parrot this misleading statement.
Today, women make up about half our workforce. But they still make 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. That is wrong.
Want to know how I know women aren't being paid 23% less than men for the same amount of work? Because if they were, women would make up the overwhelming majority of the workforce. If companies could simply save 23% on salaries just by hiring women, why wouldn't they? I first started thinking critically about this claim when I was writing my first book, The Alphabet of Manliness. I was trying to write a joke about the wage gap, and I had always thought it was around 75%, so I looked it up to be sure. And what I found was unexpected. The numbers were all over the place, from 64 to 84%, and everything in between. So I started doing research to see where the most recent numbers came from. Was it just pulled out of someone's ass? And if so, which assumptions did they make? According to the Washington Post, the 77% figure that the White House states comes from raw wage data that looks only at the annual salary of all men and compares it to the annual salary of all women, regardless of job type or hours worked. So essentially, it's comparing the salary of female elementary school teachers to the salary of male petroleum engineers. Worthless. That's like taking the average salary of a cashier at Ralph Lauren, adding in the CEO's salary of $66.7 million, and then saying that the average employee at their flagship store makes $1,612 per hour. That's why you don't conflate job types when you're looking at salaries. Compare like to like. Why am I having to explain this to people in 2015?
That is wrong.
A study commissioned by the U.S. Department of Labor found that when all relevant variables are accounted for, the pay gap shrinks to about 93 to 95%. In fact, even a study by the American Association of University Women found that when you control for all the same variables, they found that the wage gap corresponds to the U.S. Department of Labor numbers, even though they decided to go with the lower figure of 93%. In fact, in a 64-page report, they only mentioned this number in one sentence, one time, along with one small graph. They then tried to obfuscate these findings by saying that just over 1/3 of the pay gap cannot be explained. Think about it. That sounds like there's still a 33% pay gap, but what they're actually saying is 1/3 of the original gap of 23% is still there. So in other words, 33% of 23%. That's a real shitty way of saying the number 7.
That is wrong.
But they have a point. There's still a small pay gap of about 5 to 7%. So what's the cause? Is it a big sexist conspiracy? It's possible that gender discrimination accounts for some of the difference. After all, Home Depot settled a class action lawsuit nearly 2 decades ago alleging that they didn't promote as many women to sales floor positions, although they deny any wrongdoing. We have laws in this country against sexual discrimination like the Equal Pay Act of 1963, the Education Amendments Act of 1972, and the Fair Pay Act of 2009. Not to mention the shitty Paycheck Fairness Act, which is a redundant turd of a bill that relies on that misleading 77% number. A far more likely explanation for the remaining 7% is that women are far less likely to negotiate for salaries than men. In a study conducted by the Stockholm School of Economics, researchers found that only 28% of women were willing to negotiate for more pay, compared with 43% of men. Another study from Carnegie Mellon came about when a group of female graduates complained that their male counterparts were getting teaching jobs, whereas the women were only getting teaching assistant jobs. When the professor asked the dean why, he simply said that none of the females had asked for teaching jobs, whereas the males had. The economics professor conducted an experiment and found that 83% of men versus only 58% of women negotiated for higher pay. And here's the kicker. The difference was 7% more on average compared to women who didn't negotiate. Where have I heard that number before? Not that it matters much, because studies have found that women have a higher job satisfaction than men, despite perceived wage discrepancies. According to the New York Times, a man who reports being unsatisfied with his job earns as much as a woman who reports being extremely satisfied with her job. One possible explanation that these studies don't explore is that women value jobs that help society significantly more than men. It's also possible that all these disingenuous blowhards who keep spreading this misinformation are causing women to expect lower pay, which causes them to have higher job satisfaction. And for the record, I hired 2 women illustrators for my book, and I paid them the exact same wages that I paid the men. It's too bad that the 77% figure is a myth, because I would have loved to put those savings in my pocket. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Maddox.
I believe when women succeed, America succeeds.